Hey everyone, I'm going to read the next part of the study notes for 1 Corinthians. This is the authorship. The authorship of 1 Corinthians is well attested. The writer calls himself Paul, chapter 1 verse 1, chapter 3 verse 4, verse 6 verse 22, and 16 verse 21. The epistle harmonizes well with Acts and other Pauline letters. Frequent mention is made in 1 Corinthians of contemporaries of the mid-1st century. Christian writers around AD 100 quote the epistle. Virtually all scholars agree that this is a genuine Pauline writing. The date and place of writing. Paul indicates that he is writing from Ephesus in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 8 and verse 19. If this letter comes at the end of Paul's stay there, as seems likely, the time would be about the spring of AD 55. The theme of this, Paul's longest epistle, is that believers are called into the fellowship of Jesus Christ in chapter 1, verse 9. A number of vital concerns are wrapped up in this theme. Paul is deeply disturbed that the Corinthians do not seem to understand the nature of the gospel and the need for discipline and submission to the authority of Christ and of Paul, Christ's apostle. Certain terms are used repeatedly, such as knowledge, wisdom, discern, love, holy, and sanctify. Chapter 13 contains perhaps the greatest chapter in the Bible on love. Chapter 15 is a classic passage on the resurrection. Throughout the epistle, Paul reflects the intense concern of a spiritual father struggling to bring his problem children back into fellowship and submission. The thrust throughout is practical. As each situation warrants, the letter takes the form of instruction, correction, rebuke, or edification. But always one sees the heart of this great pastor apostle reaching out to a congregation with much potential, but also with many problems. Here's the argument. Paul opens the epistle with a rebuke of the disorders in the assembly, namely misconceptions regarding the nature of the body of Christ, the message of the gospel, and the nature of the ministry in chapters 1 to 4. And then he deals with matters of discipline as necessary in the case of lust, lawsuits, and license in chapters 5 and 6. Having taken care of these matters, Paul's next answers the specific questions addressed to him on matters of doctrine and church government. And here he focuses his attention on Christian marriage, Christian liberty, worship, and spiritual gifts in chapters 7 to 14. Finally, his chapter on the resurrection is directed to an additional problem of certain Greeks in the assembly who had problems with the doctrine of the bodily resurrection in chapter 15. This is the only doctrinal error as such that Paul has to deal with in the epistle, and it does not appear to have been one of the questions asked by the Corinthians. So the outline of 1 Corinthians is in chapters 1 and verses 1 through 9, we have the introduction, and then in verses 10 through chapters 4 through 21, we have the disorder of the fellowship, and then in chapters 5 through 6 verse 20, there's discipline for the fellowship relating to lust, lawsuits, and license. And then in chapter 7 through chapter 15, verse 58, there's doctrine for the fellowship about marriage and worship, Christian liberty, spiritual gifts, and resurrection. And then chapter 16, verse 1 to 24, there's the conclusion. So that's the study notes, and I'll be diving into chapter 1 soon.